I was young and my back was strong, I went down the mine a fine young man. But now I'm bent and my strength's all gone, I'll not be going down the mine again. Down the lane, lad, down the lane, I'll not be going down the mine again. With two strong arms and shoulders broad, I could swing a pick or drive a road. 'Twas as a ripper I served me time, and I left me health and strength down the mine. Down the lane, lad, down the lane, I'll not be going down the mine again. Now I've bathed in sweat and I've choked on dust, and I've worked in water up to the waist, and when the gas was at its worst, I've toiled till I thought my head it would burst. Down the lane, lad, down the lane, I'll not be going down the mine again. Now the blast, it took many fine young men, and now my working days are done. And when the cage door slammed for the very last time, there were no tears down these cheeks of mine. Down the lane, lad, down the lane, I'll not be going down the mine again. Now this house is like a prison cell. If I could walk, I'd be down yon hill. But at 51 I'm past my prime, and it's all through working down in the mine. Down the lane, lad, down the lane, I'll not be going down the mine again. Down the lane, lad, down the lane, I'll not be going down the mine again.
Kiveton Park is a recent settlement, only growing in size with the development of a local coal industry. For hundreds of years the area was merely farmers' fields, with few inhabitants. The settlements of Wales and Harthill are recorded much farther back in history. The earliest recording of the area is in the Domesday Survey, dated 1086, and even in 1378 the population of Wales was only recorded at 42 people. The Duke of Leeds acquired the land during the late 1700s, and promptly built a manor alongside the Todwick Ponds. The land known as Keaton, now known as Kiveton, became his hunting grounds, thus gaining the latter of its name, Kiveton Park. Kiveton Park is like a lot of areas up and down the country. With its traditional industries gone, the area is suffering from typical social problems and petty crime, such as burglary and joyriding. The effects of the massive expansion of drug use and availability throughout the last 15 years in England has also bared its toll on what was once a thriving community. Kiveton Park is a product of the Industrial Revolution and later the Technological Revolution of Britain. Many local people are still coming to terms with the changing identity of their village, and many problems have been attributed to the closure of the local colliery. There are 4 major events that shape Kiveton Park into the place it is now, and they are the Chesterfield Canal, the railway, the sinking of the pit, and the closing of the pit. The Chesterfield Canal was run through the area around 1760. By 1776, the canal was complete and functioning, creating a major transport route which linked Chesterfield, Worksop and Retford. This massive trade route was a source of constant business and brought wealth to areas lying along its banks. It ran through the south of Wales, with 13 locks in the local area, and included the Norwood Tunnel, which was a massive 3,000 feet long, an engineering achievement to be proud of in those days. The legger who was responsible for manoeuvring the barges through the Norwood Tunnel was not an envied occupation. His responsibility would be to lie on his back using his hands and feet on the oozing, dripping, grimy tunnel roof in order to push the barge to the other side. Leggers wouldn't earn a great deal, and the strain on muscles and bones from this sort of practice would often cripple at a young age. The atmosphere in the Norwood Tunnel was always troubling, but in summer when warm it was often unbearable. In case 2 barges were going down the tunnel at both ends, in the middle was a massive bell-like structure, in which a barge could wait in order to let another pass. Throughout this time the canal was the main source of transport in the area. Kiveton Park and its surrounding areas, Wales and Harthill, grew steadily in size. This caused much distress to some of their inhabitants, who often had to put up with rowdy and drunken behaviour relatively unknown previously. The canal was to fall into disrepair with the introduction of the railway, and by 1900 the Norwood Tunnel was ready to collapse. Records show that mining of the coal seams around this area has been dated back as far as 1537. However, it wasn't until the mid-19th century that the area began to experience rapid growth. The Kiveton Park Coal Company was created in March of 1864. It consisted of 14 men and had an estimated capital of £200,000. The owners of the Kiveton Park Coal Company were Edward Dawson and Thomas Carrington, names of 2 terraces of housing in Kiveton. Sinking of number 1 and number 2 shafts started on the 6th of June 1866. On the 6th of December 1867, the Barnsley seam had been breached. Its produce was ideal for use on ships as fuel. Ventilation in the pit was created by a fire which was extremely dangerous at the bottom of number 2 shaft. This was replaced by a steam-driven fan in 1904. In 1861, before the creation of the Kiveton Park Coal Company, the population of Kiveton Park stood at 305 people. By 1871, once the pit was fully functioning, this number had swollen to 1,359, and by 1929, when the colliery was employing its largest workforce of 2,244 men, this number had tripled to above 4,000 people. Number 2 shaft was sunk to 733 yards to work the silkstone seam, yet to this day it remains unworked. Number 1 shaft was sunk to 67 yards in 1884. This was to reach the Thorncliffe seam, which was worked for 7 years and then abandoned due to a 5-inch band of dirt in the middle of the seam. The coal extracted was used for coking, and coke ovens were positioned where the pithead baths are now. They were last worked in May 1895 and vanished in 1922. Further shafts were sunk in 1874 and 75 in the West Kiveton area, in order to access the Barnsley and High Hessel seams. Miners from Killamarsh would enter from West Kiveton shafts after work commenced in 1900. By 1930, all work in this area was abandoned. Many describe the job of a miner, especially to the first generations of miners, as strenuous, dangerous, dirty, unhealthy and poorly paid. For the last generations of miners, the job changed during the time around the Second World War, with hand jet work ceasing by 1940. Once electric drilling equipment had been installed.
Once I started on Coalfields, I think the fun when, the fun that we'd had as pony drivers, even though once you got onto Coalfields and you were actually having to graft really hard. I mean, I'm talking about when coal were hand got. I come out just as the machine age were coming in. I were on my way out. I'd had enough on it. The Trepanner had come into Ezel, and in Barnsley they'd got Miko Moors, and I think just before that, they'd got Trepanners into Barnsley by then as well, I think. But most of my, in fact all of my coalfields were done when it were hand got, pick and shovel and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't want anybody to have to do that, because I personally found it bloody hard, really hard. There were men I worked with, I mean I'm coming on 65 now, and I worked with men that were coming up to that age then and were still grafting on coalfields.
Nationalisation, which took place in the late 1940s, brought about great changes, which included better pay.
Initially I worked down at Quarry, Turner's Quarry, in precast concrete department. That was my very first job when I left school at 15. But my younger brother, who were a year younger than me, he left school and he started here at Kiveton Park. He was coming home with twice as much money as me, and he was a year younger. If I worked Saturday morning down at Turner's, he used to make me £2.18 a week. That were if I worked Saturday morning. My brother were working 5 days at Pidd, and he was coming home with £5 a week, which were a big difference. And me being older brother, that went against the grain, and I thought, I want some of that money. And that was the reason I started at Pitt, actually. It weren't because I really wanted to, but that was my main reason for starting, getting that extra money. Because one thing I must say, even though they had to strike for more money than that, in them early days when I were on Coalfields and in Ripping, the miners at that time were among highest paid men in this country. We were on good money. Even before I got married, when I was living at home, I can remember going home, which doesn't sound much now, but then I can remember going home with £27 wages. I used to give my grandmother, who I lived with my grandparents, I used to give her £4 board out of that, and the rest were mine. I used to be borrowing my £4 back on Monday. After I'd paid her on a Friday, I used to be borrowing it back on Monday, soft as a brush, so like a man with no arms. Because I'd got plenty of money. It doesn't sound a lot now, but that were a good lot of money. A fair comparison, an uncle of mine who worked on surface and were bringing a family up, and he were only on £7 a week. That's all he were bringing on, and I were coming home with 27, because we were on good money. In Ripping, we were on contract, and the more you did, the more you got, and the quicker you did it, not rest, how contract work was. But that were then.
Often miners would be half submerged in water and covered in cuts and bruises. Many considered themselves lucky if their only complaint throughout their career was perhaps a broken arm or leg. Miners were also looked down upon by the higher classes, despite mining being one of the industries that gave Britain the prosperity it has enjoyed for many years. We asked ex-miners what it was like working down the pit.
You can be lonely, you can be a lot of people, but it's just like living like a mole in a dark tunnel. And if you're on your own walking down a dark tunnel, you can imagine all sorts of things coming down the tunnel after you, Sometimes on my job I used to walk about a lot of different places, and you're walking for half an hour and never see a soul. And then your mind starts thinking things, all sorts of things.
During the day, I mean, mainly as pony drivers, your job were getting supplies to coalfields. You got to take props, bars, whatever, shells. When they had shells in, they brought shells in, which were opposed to using powder for blowing, for shot firing. They were about, what would they be, about a yard long, and about, there would be 2.5 to 3 inch in diameter, a long steel rod sort of thing. And at the end of it, there'd be a old board for that on Coalfields. That shell would be shoved in. In the end of it, it had two like catchers. It had got a charge in it, obviously. When the shot firer fired the shell, these you were putting in what appeared to be just like a steel tube you were pushing into coal. But in the end on it had got these things what came out, like wings that came out. And when the shot firer put the charge into it, threw these wings out like that, and then back, and as they came out, they pulled the coal out with them. That's how shells were. Well, they had to be got to Coalfields as well.
When the shift was over, what shall I say, we came out between 1:30 and 2 were the winding times. It took me 3/4 of an hour to walk home. Then it took me half an hour to get back to get the dirt off, and I wasn't dirty inside of my father. My father was 3 shades backer than a crow, and then it would be 3:30. Then it would be 3 o'clock. Then you would have your dinner, what was called the dinner. Then after that, you stretched a mile and yawned a furlong, and you decided to have an hour. Then after that, at tea time, you go out, and speaking of a boy in the first instance, to go on the recreation to kick a ball about or something like, or go walk.
Then they go in lamp cabin, get the lamp, go onto the bank, queue up to go down the shaft, whichever shaft they were going down. I went down the high hazel. And the ears used to pop as you went through air doors because that was the upcast shaft. And once you got in your cage, there'd be a lot of talking, mostly with men, and before they got on the cage anyway. And as soon as they got on the cage, most just went quiet and everybody switched the lights out. And then you just zoom, drop down. And when it was steam winding, your stomach came up into your chest. And then when you got to the bottom, when you were nearly to the bottom, you started breaking. Your legs would start buckling, you're hanging onto the handrail. And then your stomach would go opposite way then, with G-forces.
It's good to have a mixture of old and new, and the old ones can tell the younger ones what it was like, and count your blessings that you've got it better than what we had it. I think I've never had to work down at Pitt, but it must have been goddamned awful. Yeah, being lucky in that way.
Life,
I think you've got to have a lot of admiration for the people who did work there, and still do in some areas.
We asked ex-miners for their memories of their time in the pit.
There's a little story about Dan. This is God's honest true story. They always, it's a bit of a myth and a legend about pit ponies warning you of imminent disaster and that. But there's some truth in it actually, because little Dan once saved me from what could have been a serious injury. I wouldn't say he saved my life, but it could well have done. I was driving him down this gate. You know where a gate is, don't you?
Yeah.
Tunnel to Coalfields. And it was very low where we were working, and there were a type of roof support called herringbone. Basically what it is, it's one long wooden poles, that runs parallel with gate, with small ones going up into that. Say you'd get, for instance, you might have a 10-foot long one running that way with about 6 struts up to it, which were fastened into the top, and they were fastened into the side at wall at gate, so that when pressure came on, it actually pushed them into the side and made them solid. Well, anyway, this particular day I was going under these, and little Dan just stopped. I was actually behind him because there weren't room to go upside on him. There weren't room to get over the top of the tub because it was that small. I were actually stood behind him with a check rein from his cap over back at tub, walking behind him, when he's just stopped dead. And of course I'm telling him to go on, but he wouldn't, so I got mad and cursed him a few times, but he still weren't going to go. So I had to find my way somehow from back at tubs to get over to front to his head to try and move him from front. I eventually managed to scrawl my way through over top at tub and past him to his front, and stood at front on him and got over his head, his cap, they wore a cap as you know, and I'm pulling on him like this. He refused to budge, when all of a sudden the whole timber come crashing down, just slightly, and it caught me on shoulder, a couple of struts caught me on shoulder, but had he kept going, we'd probably been right underneath that when it come down, and both of us, I'm not saying we would have killed, but we might have had a serious injury because there were bits of muck followed it as well. And as it happened, it weren't that bad. I cleared away in front of me and managed to get him through. When I got back, went and told these, because what happened, it was what they call back ripping. Once the tunnels had been made through to Coalfields, eventually, as the face advanced, they deteriorated. So they had to have men coming up, what they call back ripping. That's what they used to do. And anyway, I was leading to these back rippers. You'd take what they were ripping and take it to another area and gob it, and that's what happened. When I told them when I got back what happened, they come and repair damage, and that were it. But that's just one little thing. Even though it were a myth, and even a legend perhaps, that they could warn you, they actually could. I suppose they heard things that we didn't, or sensed something, who knows, I don't know what it is, but he saved me probably from serious injury himself as well. I suppose he was more bothered about himself than me probably, but anyway, it worked. That's just one thing.
Of colliery life on the whole, providing it was, which invariably it was, self-contained, contained an element of comradeship, also an element of give and take.
Oh yes, it's changed, yes, yeah. Well, there doesn't seem to be much dust. There used to be a lot of dust at one time when the colliery working, and not only that, people going to work, different shifts all the time. You could always meet or see somebody going to the colliery with them being on 3 shifts. If you went out, somebody would be going to work. But that's gone. You don't see them going to work now. Hopping on the bus maybe. That's it.
There were some horses there. They were like racehorses, you know. They could really move. At end of shift, I shouldn't really say this because we weren't supposed to do it, but at end of shift it was like Grand National. I'm telling you. When I first went down Kiveton Pit, in deep, in Barnsley, there were 32 ponies. In Esel, I think there were 29. But I didn't go down Esel till later on when I did my Coalfields training. But most of them ponies were working on day shift. Then there were an afternoon shift. There wouldn't be a lot on afternoons, and there'd be very few of them on nights, you know. But because most of the work were done on day shift when supplies were taken to Coalfields and that, you know. But at end of shift, it would be about to stables, and it were about 3 miles to stables. From where you were working, it could be as much as 3 miles, you know, to get back to stables. And we used to go stretch gallop, all on it in a bunch. And I tell you, there were some spills. There were some spills. It's in them days. I think back and I sometimes think, oh God, we were idiots, but with no fear. When you're young, you've no fear, have you? You don't see fear. You don't care. You're that full of bravado. You're doing. And I said, there'd be maybe a dozen going back together. All wanted to be back to stables first, and it was stretch gallop. Honest, I'm telling you.
Well, this Dosco machine, the hydraulic motor on track had broke. So I went to change it, and I found out the bolts that held it on was sheared. So I had to go underneath, in between the tracks, to drill them out with a ratchet drill. So I got all geared up, all the tassel. Started drilling away merrily and laid there whistling to myself, drilling on, laid on my back ratcheting these holes out. And then I suddenly remembered about a tank crew that slept and came out of the tank at night to sleep under the tank because it was warmer than trying to sleep in tank. And the ground was soggy and wet, and the tank slowly settled while they were asleep and crushed all 5 and killed them. And I suddenly remembered this, and I shot out from underneath this dusco. I thought, Christ, if this ground's soft, because I didn't work on that district regular, on these tunnels, and if the ground was soft, it could settle. And I thought, if it settles down on me while I'm under here, slowly, nobody will know I'm here, because nobody knew where I were anyway. So I shot out, and I got up for some pull lifts and chains and clamps to hold it up. And I wouldn't go back. I told them I weren't going back underneath until I got 3 sets. And they sent somebody with them, and we lifted this dusco, supported it to the girders above, and then me and this lad went underneath and drilled the bolts out and changed the motor.
And when I came to Kiveton and I got into the pit bottom, what they call the pit bottom, I wondered what the smell was. And it was 80 ponies in a stable. Goodness me, goodness me, goodness me. And I've heard some cruel remarks about different things. Everyone, my father-in-law had a wonderful memory of a pony that he drove, and it had nearly taught speak to him. And it was forced on him by the circumstances which they worked under.
Because working in a pit, there was great comradeship amongst all workers. There was sincerity. There was wonderful memories I have of this pit. Was the day that when the 2 weeks annual holidays came, when they used to turn out the pit ponies, bring them up from the pit early on before they did away with pit ponies. And today, even on the road to Harthill, there's still what they call the pit pony field. And it was a great joy, even as a youngster. Before we even left school, we used to go down, and it was an event for those pit ponies to come up. They used to go in that field, they used to jump and kick, and it was marvellous to see. They used to have trouble when they used to have to go back down at the end of the fortnight. Like, they used to be like cowboys rounding them up, you know what I mean? And when they used to have to go back down. My dad was an assistant ostler, what they used to call ostler, and if any of those that looked after them were off, they'd call me dad in to look after them, feed them, you know, because they used to pull the tubs. And it was a great thing. And also, this pit has got the pit that was, Kiveton has got one special event, and I think it was 1949 at the Royal Show when they won the pit pony classes.
I mean, for instance, when you put timbers up to support a roof, for all intents and purposes, them timbers would hold that roof. But on occasions, the weight, you know, nature would take its course and it would push them timbers out. My worst experience of that, the most frightening experience I ever had in the pit, and it was scary, really scary. I hadn't actually been long on Coalfields. I'm working on Coalfields. This particular day, I'm trying to think what face it was. Tools, I think. I can't really. I'm not sure. I wouldn't be definite about the face number, but it hadn't been going long this face, and as we were proceeding, you know, taking coal off, and the blokes had come behind and done the packing and ripping and that. And as you got further and further out, obviously all this ground behind you that had the coal taken away from it was still open, apart from the patch that had been put on to support it. But eventually that would break and all cave in behind you. And you'd advance some way before that, what they call first weight came on, when you'd have the first break. Now, I'd never experienced this, because that's how I knew on Coalfields. And we were shoveling away. Obviously it's noisy on Coalfields. There's a belt running outside on you all the time that you chuck your coal onto. Everybody's shoveling away, there's shots being fired, there's people working with picks and what have you. So it's a noisy environment and a dusty, dirty environment as well. But all of a sudden I heard this bang. And the bloke that were working beside me were an experienced miner. I won't mention his name because he panicked a bit actually. He grabbed me by the arm and stopped me shoveling. Hold on, he said, hold on, stop, stop. And I froze, I thought, what's happening? And I tell you his word, he says, act there. That were his words, act there, that means listen. Act there, he says. I says, what's up? He says, shh, shut, act there. Stop me speaking. And then I heard this crack again, like thunder, just like thunder. That's what it was like, that's the only way to describe it. And this bloke beside me started to panic. He says, I've heard that before. I says, what is it? He says, it's weight coming on. We've got to get off at face, he says. We've got to get off as quick as we can. And he jumped straight onto the belt with coal goes. We all used to ride that belt on Coalfields to get off. He jumped onto the belt. And I thought, well, if he's going, I'm going. I'm not stopping here on my own. And before you knew where we were, every man on Coalfields had jumped onto the belt and we were all off. And while we were all doing this, the only way to describe it is this thundering were happening. And you could feel the vibration like an earthquake. Everything were bouncing and trembling round you. We all got off at Coalfields, ran into the gate, sat in the gate, every man off at face, and then that were a double unit face, there'd be probably about 50 men on that coal face, and all went off into the respective gates where they could get, some would go into middle gate, some in, because you'd have 3 gates to a double unit. Yeah. There'd be 2 supply gates and a loader gate in the middle. Well, we all got in, I forget where we were in, I think we were in supply gate where we got off, I can't remember. No, we jumped onto the belt, so we'd gone into loader gate, that's right, most on us had. And even stood in loader gate, there were muck falling round us and props were bouncing, and it was scary, really scary. I remember somebody saying, would it have been safer staying on Coalfields between 2 chocks? Because props were bouncing in the gate. And just up from us were some air doors. Somebody says, we might be better between them air doors, because there were walls in between as well at supports, you know. And somebody says, now we're better here, we can see what's happening here. Some went and some didn't. Eventually, it stopped as soon as it had started. Just like a thunderstorm, comes and goes. That's just what it was like, a thunderstorm. Only, there were nowhere to go. You know what I mean? You were confined, you were there, that were it. You could only go so far. You couldn't get away from it. It were happening all around you and it would be trembling all over. And eventually it stopped, it quietened down. An official went on to the face and inspected and come back and said it's safe to go back on. Well, when we went back on, the weight had come on to such an extent, it had thrown it over onto coal seam as well, and the weight had come down and it had actually pushed props on that particular face. There were rigid steel props. They used to bend like bananas as it weighed, and sometimes they'd shoot out as well like bullets. Yeah. And there were bent props all over. Some props had actually gone right into the ground. The roof had come down to such an extent it had actually come on top of the conveyor belt where it loaded in and fastened belt. And the coal face, which were that particular face, where I think it was 4'6", had been reduced to less than 4 foot. The roof had come down, and actually just straight at front of the face it had come down. So there were a step in roof, come down and went up with a Colliery, you know. We'd done right to come off, and then that face then had to be, well, it moved on. the next turnover it moved on obviously and left it behind. But there were quite a bit of work had to be done before the face could become productive again. Timbers and props had to be reset. The loader end had to be dug out so that it could once again turn and, you know, a conveyor could work again because it fastened it. But so there was some work had to be done before we could proceed. But once that had happened, that was the initial, what they call first wave. After that, each day as you moved on and turned over, the gob would break behind you, as, you know, on a regular basis.
I went to the Canaries before the strike, probably 15 years ago. And there was 3 lads. I was sat at the bar having a glass of beer one afternoon. I'd been for a swim. These 3 lads who were in the same hotel came up in swimming trunks, had a swimming pool, and came and sat and had a beer, and one says, "Where's the nightlife round here?" And I looked at them, and I listened to their accent. I says, "I'm guessing you're from Thorn." "Oh no, we're from Doncaster." I says, "You're not." I said, "You're from Thorn. There's a pit at Thorn." These 3 lads was about 23 years of age, single. Typical mining lads, all muscle and fit. Now I worked in steelworks, and I've seen young lads, I would say myself when I worked in steelworks, you haven't got the muscles as a mining lad, and you only develop them when you work in a pit. And these 3 lads were the fittest 3 lads in that hotel for their age group. And I knew straight away, I said, "You work down a pit," because I knew their accent, and I knew where they came from, and I knew there was a pit. Now that's the difference between mining lads and other lads in factories. They was the fittest, and you could tell when you went to Seaside at Cleethorpes in the old days, you could see the miners on the beach with muscles, especially the younger ones anyway.
And you might think I'm pulling your leg here. I keep referring back when Wellbrook Colliery was closed in 48. Kiveton Park Colliery was approached, the men were approached through the unions if they'd give them support, and they said no. And I often think, in some respects, that it was on the cards all the while. There was no doubt about it. The mining industry was going to be on its knees sooner or later, because the industrial muscle that they did was, what shall I say, was far beyond what actually you could exert anywhere else.
As bad as it were, there were a camaraderie, if you like, among men. I mean, at the end of a shift, after, you know, we'd get on Paddy Mail to come back to Pit Bottom. You know, that were the Paddy Mail train that took you to and from. As soon as I say, from Pit Bottom at Kiveton, it were approximately, 2.5 to 3 mile out to end at main level. And then you'd probably have half a mile to walk after that to Coalfields. And but for all that, and as exhausted and as spent as you were at the end of it, once you all got back together at the end of that shift, there was some good crack, you know. People were telling jokes and talking about different things. Everybody, maybe it were a sign of relief because it were over for another day, you know, and you all got together and it were a good crack, and then obviously you come out and in baths would same. They were I don't know. That's the only way you can describe it. It was a relief maybe for end of shift. It was a different case at the beginning of the shift when you were all going down, especially on day shift. You'd hardly get a word out to some people in the morning because when you consider that you'd have to be up at 4:30 in the morning.
So what effect did mining have on miners' health?
Now, I don't know the people's names obviously, but I know from not seeing people around and I know they've died. And at a rough estimate, there's possibly 200 in this district, in Kiveton district, that worked at the pit who have died before they got to 65. Now, that's the difference between pit industries and, say, working in an office in City, in London. These people down there, they're on cloud nine, they don't know what it's all about. It was dangerous all the time on the face, but people you don't think about it. If you did, you wouldn't go down a pit. I mean, there's also danger of machinery. When you're working with machinery, which a lot of colliers did, same as I did, when you're working with machinery, don't bleed. They're dangerous. And in the old days, there were a lot of roof falls, accidents, people getting buried. Whereas they didn't get a lot. Most of the accidents, I think, once they got mechanisation, was caused by machinery. People getting killed with machines. And same as these hydraulic roof supports, you know, sometimes they pull them across and they might trap a person's leg as it's pulling it in with a ram. You know, if you don't have to see him, because you can only see what your lamp's looking at.
When we were first married, we lived up on White City, on Lambrel Green actually. And most days, pit ambulance would come up there with somebody. And Pat will tell you. So, no, I don't know what she's doing, but she'd be looking through the window wondering, is it me they're bringing home? Because they never seemed to be a day, even if it were only a black nail. There weren't many days you didn't get something. A crack, a bang, a muscle injury, you know, something. Most days, there weren't a day, or very few days went by when you didn't get something. Even if it were only a black nail. And most miners had black nails. I don't know, and it weren't coal, it was just black nails through trapping them. And
well, the biggest health risk was dust. And I had an uncle die in 1942, I think, of dust. Worked at Westhorpe. And I saw him die, well, I was there just before he died. He couldn't breathe, and that way he would be about 50, I think. And me and my cousin went to see him before he died. And then I said I'd never go down a pit. But I went down a pit when I was about 30. But I worked at Colliery, he worked in stone headings. The people who worked in the stone headings were more prone to dust, especially in the older days, because they hadn't got the large extractor fans that they have later on, you know.
Miners' health?
Yeah.
Well, one of my views, which I frequently exercised, much to the detriment of certain people, and I know name, is the fact that what they had in my day,
Right.
that was an industrial accident.
Right.
And to determine an industrial accident, or other than going to Sheffield Royal Infirmary, was a matter of coming down to see the compo doctor at St John's on a Saturday morning. And you could walk in on limb, but when you went down, you were starting on Monday morning.
Right.
And I do think it ought to operate a little bit more now.
What age did young men usually leave school and go down pit at that time?
My dad started down at 12, West Kiveton, and he worked 53 years down the pit. And he'd nothing wrong with his chest or his bones. The dust affects some people more than others. Some people are more prone to chest problems than others.
Right.
Now he worked 53 years down pit and had nothing wrong with his chest or his legs. Now other people, I mean, I've had 2 steel knees at 55, well 58, something like that, 60. So I mean, and I didn't work in pits as long as him. I only worked in, what, 30 years. The modern miner is crawling on the face. He's crawling on steel. all the time because of these supports. And you're obviously you're banging them all the time, and you're crawling on steel. Whereas the old days, a miner perhaps wouldn't crawl perhaps 50 yards in a shift if on the face, and he'd be stuck in that 7-yard area where he was shifting coal and just kneeling in the same spot. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah. How did the pit affect people's daily lives?
My father was on nights regular, and it was causing a little bit of confusion at home. That's because in those days you took your dirt home with you. And if you were fortunate, there'd be enough hot water to get a bath, and if you weren't, it was a matter of waiting about till the water was hot enough.
To me, that's what future at Colliery site means. I mean, I'm not saying everybody in Kiveton would agree. I personally think open casting would have got us. The end would have justified the means as far as the park's concerned, and it would have been short-lived. The disruption it would have brought to the village would have been minimal. As far as one of the reasons put to me were the dust and disturbance and that it would have caused. There would have been no more dust coming from an open cast site than were coming out of that pit for 200 years. Because I know for a fact, up at them pit offices, them lawns outside, on summer days when you'd sit on them lawns waiting to go down pit on afternoons, or you would sat there waiting for the pit bus to take you home. You got up off that grass black. You did, quite honestly. You got up off that grass. If you'd got light coloured clothes on, they were mucky when you'd sat on that grass. You couldn't see it, that dust, you couldn't see it. And the women of this area would probably tell you, the washing, hang the washing out. And on occasion, depending on what direction the wind were in, they'd be muck on the washing. The washing lines always had to be white before they could hang the washing on them. I know that from what Pat said to me, and from my grandmother. Always used to go along the washing line with a wet cloth to clean muck off that line because she'd be covered in black dust, which had come from Pidd, mostly. You get it in your window bottoms. It were always there. You couldn't see it, but it were there. So I don't think an open cast would have been any worse than that, and it would have been much shorter lived. What would it have taken overall? From start to finish, it would have only taken 4 years, which is quite a bit different to 200 years for a deep mine, isn't it? You know.
Kiveton was very frequently troubled by not industrial strikes, but a shortage of work for the mine, for the colliery, and that we should all be playing on wrecker, as we called it. And all of a sudden, about 5 minutes to 7, we can't play any more yet. Well, we're waiting for the blower to go. And if it went at 7 o'clock, there was no work the following day at Kiveton Park Colliery, at the deep, at the Barnsley side. Now, if it went at past, there was no work at the High Hazel side. And that's how it was governed.
How did things change during the strike?
Well, as I say, I wasn't involved in the strike because I'd been made redundant the year before the strike. But it caused a lot of resentment in the village, and a lot of hardship for a lot of people in all the mining villages. Plus, what gets me today, you never see a policeman, but during the strike there was thousands swamped into Yorkshire. And I mean, these people were just fighting. Well, they weren't fighting, they were trying to survive. They wanted a better way of life.
Went up the road here when I was stopped by a police roadblock, me and my son in car. And I couldn't understand I didn't know what was happening. I'd heard people talking, but it hadn't occurred to me that it was that serious. Anyway, the police stopped me. Is it your car? Where you going? Where you come from? Everything, they wanted to know everything. I says, well, I live just down the road there. I'm going to Chesterfield station to pick some equipment up. I explained what it was all about. Oh, okay. they accepted my story and let me go. And we're driving to Chesterfield. I said to Russ, listen, that was bloody strange, wasn't it? It's like a bloody police state, you know. We're just going about his daily business and we're being stopped by police for no, you know, one, you know. Anyway, we picked this equipment up and came back. On our way back, we saw more police cars in and around. I'd never seen as many police in my life. In fact, I commented on it to Pat this morning. They're talking about the shortage of police today and crime going out of control. They found enough bloody police to stop miners, didn't they? To aggravate miners and harass miners, if you like. They found police, they come out at bloody woodwork, didn't they, then? And yet they ain't none today, they say.
My father told me that in 1926 strike, some people went back to work. I don't know who they were, because he never told me. But when I was possibly 30, which 30 years after the strike, people in the village still didn't speak to some of these people who were strike breakers 30 years later. And they never spoke to them again until they died. Because some of the people used to wave the paycheck and shout, ha ha, I've got so much money, you know, so many £100 or whatever they earned. And these others had got nothing. So that caused a lot of bitterness. Now whether they're still bitter or not, I have no idea.
Oh, while they were on leave, I did see it here. Pat had explained to me what were happening here at Bottomett Road with police, and it were happening on a regular basis apparently. And she looked at her watch this morning and says, any minute now they'll be coming. So she says, come on, you'll see. So we went through to the front door and stood in the porch, and you can see straight up road, and sure enough over hill they come. Mounted police, like. Actually, I'm laughing about it because it's funny to me at times, that part of it anyway, but it were a serious thing, weren't it? That's as much as I saw on it, really. I saw them come over hill like that, and I saw men scattering in all directions. I heard all sorts of stories after from both sides, but so I didn't really see a lot of what happened during the strike.
I think I said that it brought out the best in some people and the very worst in others. Because there were a lot of things perpetrated in name of strike, and there were a lot of people, professional agitators, came in. I mean, I stood up in our bedroom window one night and you just could not see this road of people. Now they didn't all work at Kiveton Park, you know, that time. And I mean, I actually saw them go and set fire to a field there that had just been cropped, you know, how they had set fire to it. I mean, I saw that with my own eyes. I mean, Frank gets on to me for that, but I walk round house at night if I need to, and I never switch a light on. I can get round, I mean, of course, when there's all these people outside, I mean, I went and put lights on 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And smashed our gate down, run all over the garden and everything, which I wasn't happy about. And they'd no need to.
I know you have to be very careful of what you say.
There'd been old sheds,
I know that much when we came back.
which they'd been using as weapons, etc., spades and what. I found them all over the yard. Well, I just went ballistic. I went and found the chapel where I was proudly saying on telly that my lad's this and my lad's that. So I went and told him to keep his bloody lads out of my garden. They said, coppers were after them, they've got to go somewhere. I said, if they kept going, they'd have gone to bloody Land's End. If they'd gone that way, they'd have gone. I said, they didn't need to come in my garden. But, so they just smashed the 5-bar gate, it were in 3 pieces.
So I think,
And it weren't even locked, it weren't even got a chain around it, anything, it was just on the snake. As I said, that's when I went ballistic. I said, it's got nothing to do with me, I'm not taking any sides with anybody. I said, but just keep them away from our house. I said, because, I said, actually, I said, a friend of mine's boyfriend, I said, he's one at BBC cameraman down here. So if I go and tell them that I'm here all on my own and my husband and son are thousands of miles away and I'm having all this agitation, how does that? I wouldn't have done that, but enough. I've got a new gate next day.
I mean, I can remember, I was doing a bit of dancing at the time, and I can remember wanting to go to Whitwell, and this lady was going to take us, the dancing instructor was going to take us, and when we got there, the police car was across the road. Right, you better go around there. So when we got across there, the police car was there again. And it was very restrictive, because there's no doubt about it, that there was like any other what shall I say, dispute, there's extremist factions on both sides.
You know, but I mean, to me, when it first started, the most comical thing was, I mean, I didn't even know, as I said, Frank had been out didn't even know there were going to be a strike. And I went down road, it was after he'd gone away. Was this here shanty thing up with bits of plastic flapping and what have you. And these three blokes stood there with brazier. What are they doing? Then I found out it was pickets that's right. Well, these guys that I'd seen that were doing first stint, there were blokes that only worked 2 days because they couldn't manage on one when they were actually working, but they were here picketing 24 hours a day, you know. To me that were hilarious, I thought that was funny.
The only other thing, as I say, when I came back, you got to be careful what you said in village, in and around village. I mean, I were neutral in a way, because I hadn't been here and I was no longer a miner, and my work were in a different sphere altogether. But you've still got to be careful what you say. I remember a comedian at club once saying, like, he said, same as I've just said, be careful what you say. He said, I'm not allowed to sing any Nat King Cole songs in here tonight. He says, I only asked for a Coke at bar and it broke down my throat. Things like that, you know, that were just joking. But it were that serious in some places. You've got to be careful what you said. Aye.
Up until the late 1860s, Kiveton Park still had no running water. Its people relied on local wells. The area also had no electricity, no gas and no telephone. 3 reservoirs were made at the Colliery, using the Harthill ponds and a large well at Todwick to replenish these. 2 water mains were laid in 1869 and gas was originally purchased from the railway and then from Bayton Gas Company. The colliery produced its own gas from 1870 to 1926. Like many other collieries, Kiveton Park also produced its own bricks around this time. Electric generation was not installed until 1908, and this was used until 1956, until it tapped into the national grid. Also in 1908, pipe sanitation was introduced, creating Kiveton Park's first sewers. Along with the expansion of the coal industry in Kiveton Park came the expansion of Kiveton as a place to live. During 1867, 46 houses were built to house mine workers. A further 167 houses were built in 1874. 50 more houses were built in 1928. Many of the more recent housing is still used for business and accommodation. The creation of the Regal Cinema in Kiveton, where the Forge pub is now stood, made a great impact to the community, who were delighted to be able to spend their leisure time at the cinema. The yearly carnival was an occasion to look forward to, as can be seen in these pictures, and still goes on to this day, roughly following the same route. The Methodist Chapel was also a focal point of Kiveton. There was something happening most evenings. This could include lectures, Bible studies, indoor games, magic lantern slideshows, suppers, boys' brigade, girl-friendly society, home missions and bands. Day trips were arranged by those at the chapel. These would usually be to Cleethorpes, and most children were sent to Sunday school. Other important social occasions included the coming of the fair, which would feature all sorts of rides and attractions. It's hard to imagine life for previous generations of people who lived in Kiveton Park. The advanced technology we have today is often taken for granted. For instance, for a long time clocks were not a common household possession. Often the youngest of the family would be sent to the end of the street to see the time on the colliery office clock. Plus the buzzer at the pit could be heard at vital times. At one point Kiveton even had a town crier who would stop on the end of each row of housing, ringing his bell. He would shout, "Notice!" and then announce the important information. The Kiveton Coal Company, recognising its responsibility for the welfare of the community, which it had created, built a school to educate children. This building was also used by the local vicar, as church played an integral part of the community, for many years. This stopped with the building of the St John's Room, built in 1905. The Wales Chapel had been built in 1868 by the United Methodists. It was funded through generous sums of money given to the building fund by mostly poor followers. By 1873, the Kiveton Chapel had also been built. Up until the opening of the school, which is now a youth and community centre housing several different projects, the Colliery offices, built in 1875, was used as a school. The Colliery even paid the teachers up until 1911, when the Education Act was established. As the chapel had been financed by supporters, the Pitt Baths was to be financed by miners. It was built with enough room for 1,750 miners, offered canteen facilities and was opened in August 1938. This brought about a great change for miners and their families, as it now meant they didn't have to take their dirt home with them.
You only change your pit clothes once a week anyway. And the rest of the time they were in locker at baths. And then they just went in washing machine. In the old days it were worse. When my father worked at Pitt, because everything was done in wash tub. And then it was hard work for women, but today's modern things. But the beauty of working in a pit, you went to work clean, you came home clean.
Kiveton Park was relatively lucky during both the wars. During the First World War, a couple of Zeppelin sightings were registered, as a railway line was a target, as was the pit. During the Second World War, Kiveton fared less well, with several bombing raids leaving unexploded bombs on and around the colliery site. A Blenheim bomber even crashed nose end into the land around Todwick Ponds. After a £2 million reconstruction completed in 1977, Kiveton Park Pit took its place as South Yorkshire's first full-scale drift mine. The steam engine was to revolutionise the trade, socialisation and identity of the community. The railway ran right next to the coalfields at Kiveton Park, which linked these to the ports, but more importantly to the ships docking there. The Sheffield, Grimsby and Hull lines had been built in 1845, and the service from Sheffield to port ran every 3 hours, serving the Kiveton Park station en route. Village life was relatively unaltered until 1928, when a regular bus service ran to Sheffield and Worksop. A year later the village was changed again with the opening of the Kiveton Bridge train station. This sparked a tradition of travelling to town on regular occasions to shop or socialise.
Because it was close, very closely knit. It was closely knit to the effect that when you're speaking of 1929, when the line came, when the Kiveton Bridge was opened, that was when this bridge was opened. Even to see the bridge that was going to cross the line, even to see that by the big lifted by the big cranes, that brought a crowd on the Colliery banks on Colliery Road there of at least 500. So were we more easily satisfied in those days, or were we just plain country bumpkins? Or even for sporting occasions, Kiveton Bridge, I have a photograph of the team as well, their juniors. They played Ecclesfield Red Rose at Woodhouse, and they laid a special train on from here to Woodhouse, because of anything like 400 went lined on the platform. It was such an achievement. Well, although it wasn't recognised as an achievement, it was recognised as these lads had done very well.
Personally, I think it was a bad idea, and I think it was a political decision made by a Conservative government that was more interested in breaking trade unions than it was about a sensible energy policy for the United Kingdom. Having said that, we're at where we're at. The pit has closed, and we aren't going to get it back. As much as I'll sit in pub and I'll discuss the pros and cons of tactics during miners' strike and this, that and the other, if we're going to move forward, we've got to look forward, and that's why it's about, for myself, looking towards young people at Village and saying, right, what's on the agenda for yourselves? How can we turn this into one of the best places for people to live and work?
In a way, you can't stop progress. And everybody will complain about ecology and pollution. But it had a long-term effect when they shut the pit, because not only shutting 40,000 miners out of work, they must have shut 40 or 50,000 other workers in other industries out of work that fed the pits with equipment, from steel industry working right down to the smallest bit of plastic that's in a machine, you know, or whatever. So on a long-term effect, it affected a lot of people for a long time. Now possibly a lot of these people have had to find different means of employment, and there's been a lot of smaller industries started up since then, you know.
In them days, you couldn't wait to start work. I suppose kids today probably the same. They get the schooling up and think, I'm a man, I want a job. I don't think that probably hasn't changed. Unfortunately, they ain't the jobs now that they were for us. Having said that, I personally, and this is only a personal opinion, I'm glad they ain't a pit for them to go down. Because I've said it, and I've heard lots of my mates say it, I wouldn't want a lad of mine going down pit. It's terrible that them jobs aren't there. It's contradictory really what I'm saying, because I personally won't want pits to be open. I would glad when they shut them. Only for that reason, the fact that nobody else would have to go down there and work in them sort of conditions, which were alien to what we were. I mean, if we'd have been meant to work underground, it would have been moles rather than people. That's a mole's job, isn't it, working underground? Sometimes, I'm going to contradict myself here, because sometimes it crosses my mind, looking at today's world, it might do everybody good to have a year underground, to know what work's all about.
The closing of the pit was a great loss for the local community, as it was a major employer. The knock-on effects meant local shops were hit hard, and a lack of community spirit was noticed by many people. This also meant that further generations would not be going down the mine, which was a welcome thing by many miners who openly admit they would not want their son going down the pit. However, this meant many young men being out of work and detached from the community, where previously they would have been accepted from a young age once they had become one of the lads down pit.
Because a lot of, obviously, every child can't go to university and get a very high-powered job. So some's got to work down in a pit. And it kept them off the streets, it gave them pocket money, with plenty of money in their pockets. Well, once that pit had shut, all this had finished. And then the young lads today, they've nothing to look forward to unless they're lucky enough to get to university and get a good job. They just, I don't know only what's reading papers about dead end kids sort of thing, which they had on film going out in America, you know, about the dead end kids. But in a way, you can't stop progress.
Around the turn of the 20th century, young men started down the pit as young as 12. After the war, most young men went down the pit at 15. The year the pit was closed, over 50% of crime in the area was caused by those under the age of 17, which was attributed to the lack of facilities, and over 50% of those over the age of 60 wouldn't use public transport because of fear. Plans to open cast the Colliery land, which would have released 650,000 tonnes of coal previously unreachable, and replaced it with a landscaped waterway, were thrown out in 1999. Despite the success of open cast mining at the Waleswood pit site, which is now the hugely successful and popular Rother Valley Country Park, attracting people from all over all year round. This was also despite local unemployment being well above the national average. The proposals are still an emotive issue to those on both sides of the argument, especially as the project would now have been completed. However, plans to refurbish the pithead baths and to reopen the Chesterfield Canal through the area are still being worked at and supported by the local community. The pithead baths building has since fell into disrepair, and the Community Development Trust are currently trying to reopen it as a centre for local entrepreneurs, projects and businesses. We asked some local people how they thought the area should advance.
I'm especially pleased to see the music project has now got the garage converted, and we're actually doing something for young people in the village. As far as the colliery, the pit site itself is concerned, I'm on record over many years now arguing that we want more than a grassing over of the pit site, that we should be looking to develop facilities on there that are owned through the trust, by the community, through the development trust, that hopefully are income generating. I've no problem with making money. What I don't want to see is any money that's made disappearing with the private sector out of Kiveton, that money is reinvested back into Kiveton and other projects.
I think myself it needs something like a leisure centre where the young people can go. A big leisure centre where they can go swimming, badminton, tennis, all under the roof. That's what's needed here. And the ideal place is where the colliery used to be. The Pidd Baths. It's a listed building, so they say. They don't know what to do with it. There's water laid on there, electricity, drains. They've even got, I dare say, there'll be gas coming out of the ground where they could use for their baths. They've got all the foundations there for a leisure centre. And that would be a big asset to the village, I think.
Rather than me being prescriptive and saying, I think we should do this, I think we should do that as your borough councillor, I'm more interested in sitting down with people like yourselves and saying, right, here's a facility, here are some of the possibilities, what are your ideas, and how can we actually link that to potential developments on Pitt site. Some of the ideas that I've heard from young people are around maybe a community cafe, that there could be a climbing wall in there, that we could have managed workspace. I really do believe we need to create the opportunity for people locally to be entrepreneurial and set up their own businesses, and that should be supported in first instance by the trust managing workspace in there that's easily accessible, and so we're lowering the risks if people want to try and set themselves up. So I think a combination of those things that are complementary is very, very important. The Pitt Baths, returning to the first question, are a legacy of mining in the village. I'm very aware that the baths were built from a levy from miners' wages, and from that point of view it seems a suitable monument for us to be restoring and putting to good use in the future at a community level, and as I say, supporting people at a local level to develop their own jobs, to develop their own future, and actually have it as an asset owned by ourselves as a community through the trust.
Well, I'd like to see the canal open or been made for the, like a basin, canal basin, same as at Shire Oaks. I mean, I've gone down Cheshire canoeing and sighting on canals, because my daughter lives down that way, and they have these big canal basins where there's all these leisure boats and everything. It creates employment, it makes the area look nice, and it creates tourism. A lot of people go to look at these things, and that's what wants to be developed in the pit site, instead of just leaving it as a grassy field so somebody can skate about on it on a motorbike. It wants making into a proper marina, the tunnel opening, which will create a lot of tourism in this district, possibly some employment. It'd look nice. You could have a fishing pond there as well, you know, you could have fish in it. I mean, if you go down to Shire Oaks, where the colliery site were, Shire Oaks, they made a smashing marina there, and boats are now going up into that marina and anchoring up. When I first saw it when it was finished, it looked like Saint-Tropez without palm trees, and no boats at the first time, you know.
It's one of the nicest communities I've lived in. Having lived in a big city such as Manchester and Wolverhampton, it's a big, big difference to come to what you would call a closed community like Kiveton. I think what we're looking for in the community is some investment, making use of some of the facilities we've got, extending them a little bit. Obviously the building I'd like to see remain is the Pitt Baths, because that was built from the contributions of local miners. They paid for it themselves out of their wages.
See things that is beneficial for the next generations coming up, the young generation and the teenagers today, and for the older people. What gets me, I know for a fact that with the young people, a lot of condemnation is poured upon them and scorn, which is unnecessary, because there's a lot of young people that do good voluntary stuff, and also they do charitable work, which in one way they do more charitable work probably than what my generation did when I was young. So in that way I do salute them. I want to see that they have the old pit baths here, that they have facilities, that they have good facilities, that the old pit baths here, that they can have it as a project, that they can use it for recording. There can be budding singers, budding musicians, budding poets, them that can be artists, those that can be writers, because amongst each and every one of us there's a poem and there's a novel in each and every one of us. I also want as a granddad to see my grandchildren come and see, you know what grass is, that they're going to replant this environment with trees and all like that. It's going to be a pleasure for all people to walk. Wherever you get things planted like that, you've got the wildlife environment.
A few more recreational facilities for young people, definitely. They've been trying to get a swimming pool and things, but Rotherham Council don't seem to want to know about anything. I think that's what young people need, more facilities, because it is a big village now, outside of what it was. I mean, there must be hundreds and hundreds more people live there than what they did 30 years ago, and there's no more facilities whatsoever, they're just the same.
I publish my newspapers and I air my tour reviews. I don't care about the truth, I seldom print the news. I slander all the workers, on my friends I pass. From my privileged position, it's a weapon of my class. Oh, a weapon of my class. I'm appointed by the government to run down British coal. I can throw 100,000 miners on the dole. If they strike the state police, we'll kick them up the arse and throw them into prison. It's a weapon of my class. Oh, a weapon of my class. Now I'm a poor stockbroker on my last 100,000. To keep my mistress and my mansion I am struggling now. But I can swear that black is white and copper it is brass, and profit it is loss, for that's a weapon of my class. Oh, weapon of my class. I'm a Tory politician and I sit on several boards. I vote on vested interest for my bosses and their lords. I can tell the unemployed that there are jobs en masse, for I massage statistics, it's a weapon of my class. Oh, weapon of my class. Now you noble men and women, you must stand up for your rights. They won't give you breathing space unless you stand and fight. Fight to eat the bread and wine and not to eat the grass. United we can beat them, it's a weapon of our class.